This is GBN America, the first of a series of broadcasts I'm going to do between now and November next year, when, of course, there's going to be the next presidential election. Why, you might ask, is a Brit so involved with American current affairs and politics? Well, ever since I was 18, our relationship with America and my relationship with America has dominated my adult life. I began at 18 working for a big Wall Street company. I then moved on and worked for a big firm of commodity traders from Chicago. I kind of, in the 90s, was almost like a cross-Atlantic commuter going to New York, Chicago at least once every month. I feel culturally our two countries are closer today than they've ever been. And if you look at art, literature, music, clothing, trends of all kinds, we tend to follow America. Politically, though, in 2016, America followed us. Yeah, we voted Brexit, and they then voted for President Trump. And it was part of the same wave. And it was that and getting involved with doing broadcasts for Fox News from about 2012 onwards and other American media that I got very involved in that 2016 presidential campaign. And look, hands up, clean confession, I'm a friend of Donald J. Trump. I enjoy visiting him at Mar-a-Lago or up in Turnberry or wherever it may be. And I absolutely want him to win this next presidential election. I think for the safety of the Western world, we need him. Yeah, sure, his out there New Yorker style isn't necessarily for everybody, but I tell you what, I believe he gets the big calls right. Now, I'm joined today by Mike Brnovich, former Attorney General, of course, in Arizona, and also a friend of President Trump. Mark, welcome to the programme. You know, let's start. And you and I have discussed this before on GB News, the British version. It is quite difficult from this side of the pond to look at the American legal system and how it works without kind of shaking my head. And I'll put this to you. 20 years ago, the real differences between Clinton's Democrats and, say, either of the Bush's Republicans were quite marginal. So whoever got voted into a judicial position, you know, they would have different nuances on issues. But now American politics has become so tribal, so divided, that I begin to ask myself, is it right for courts up to the supreme level to effectively have political appointees, or for people to get voted at local areas on the basis of their party colour?
Well, thank you for having me on again. It's always a pleasure. And I have not a chance to talk to you in person, but congratulations on your recent foray into the Australian...
the jungle. Yes, exactly. Yes. And I've come back unscathed.
You're still a celebrity, so you'll always be number one in our hearts. But on a more serious note, look, I mean, I was not only the elected Attorney General in Arizona, I'm a former federal prosecutor. I was a state gang prosecutor. I know a lot, obviously, about the American justice system. And what is happening is heartbreaking to me, because I think what's happening is we're seeing an assault on our institutions. And I think the far left, what they've done is they've adopted a strategy that the ends justifies the means. Yeah. And so essentially they look at Donald Trump as the devil, and they're going to do everything they can to essentially disenfranchise half of America in order to prevent him from even running. And I couldn't help but think on my way over here of, you know, the man for all seasons, you know, Thomas More, who gets in this debate with Roper, and, you know, Roper basically says, well, you know, what would you be willing to, you know, do in order to get the devil? And Roper talks about the fact that he's willing to cut down all the laws in order to get the devil. And Sir Thomas More reminds him that once you get rid of all the laws, there is nothing going to be there to hold you when the wind blows. And essentially, the devil will still be there. And so I think that there's actually a very good lesson from British history about how the ends cannot justify the means. And quite frankly, I like that. That's an old Marxist trope. I like that. Now, overnight, we've learned that in Colorado, and albeit, you know, it's quite a strong Democrat state, but that's not the point, it seems to me. And whether you like Donald Trump or not is neither the point. But the Supreme Court in Colorado, which is an entirely Democrat-appointed Supreme Court, have voted by 4-3, using Section 3, or their interpretation of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution, to disbar Donald J. Trump from standing in Colorado
in the next presidential election, November 2024. I mean, this is serious.
Yeah, once again, it's very, very disappointing. And you mentioned it was a 4-3 decision. So even with an entirely Democratic court, 4 of the justices on the Colorado Supreme Court thought it was a bad decision. Yeah. And one of the justices in the dissent pointed out that Donald Trump hasn't even been indicted or charged or convicted of anything related to insurrection. And, you know, as someone that did constitutional law, I would remind the voters, the United States is a constitutional republic. It's not a majoritarian system. The Constitution is designed to protect our rights and liberties. And that 14th Amendment, Section 3, provides basically that if you're a member of Congress, a senator, a member of the military, a state office holder, that if you're involved in an insurrection, you are barred from holding office. It does not actually mention the president or the vice president, which I think is very, very telling. Additionally, so all your viewers know that the 14th, 13th, 15th Amendment were what's called the post-civil rights or Civil War amendments.
Yes.
And they were designed to protect newly freed African Americans and protect the Republic. And the reality is that statute has not been used in more than 100 years against someone running for, federal office or federal office holder. It was designed to prevent former Confederates or people that were in places like South Carolina or, the southern states from basically getting or returning to Congress or, in federal office.
Well, this is why it was chucked out in Michigan, New Hampshire, Florida. Other people have tried in states to do this and it's been rejected. I was reminded today that in 1860, this is before, of course, the American Civil War.
Joe Biden was around.
Well, he was quite old by then. Yes. But Abraham Lincoln was barred from standing in 10 of the southern states. Yeah. So this has happened before, but that happened as America was hurtling towards a catastrophic civil war. I mean, what happens now, Mark? Do other states follow Colorado?
There is a troubling trend, and what's happening is the far left in the United States and people that have been co-opted by the far left without realizing it are systematically, basically undermining and disenfranchising voters in the United States. And so it's a serious precedent. And what's happening is, as you know, and I know you've talked about this, that you have multiple criminal cases going on in both federal and state court. Yeah. And now you have all these legal challenges going on. And so essentially what they're trying to do is create within the Trump campaign and for Donald Trump a situation where he is constantly at war battling, and it's like whack-a-mole. Where he's
and not campaigning.
Right, exactly. And so, and look, I mean, there's no such thing as a coincidence. That's, one of the, I call the Brnovich rules. And the fact that you look at the timing of this, Donald Trump was, last held elected office, more than three years ago. And the fact that now in America you have the primaries and the caucuses coming up, and he's expending, and his campaign is expending a lot of time and energy having to fight civil and criminal cases. And I just think that's what happens in banana republics or third world countries. And look, if people don't like Donald Trump, and I know people that don't,
that's fine.
Then you go to the ballot box, you make your argument on TV.
But this is a denial of democracy, isn't it?
Right. Well,
this is an outright denial of democracy.
You're fundamentally disenfranchising. Yeah. So the left is always talking about, well, we want people to engage in the political process. We want to make sure people can vote. And what they're essentially doing is denying the candidate choice for half the country. And I think that if you're, like I said, wherever you fall on the political spectrum, if you believe your ideas and your values are good, then you shouldn't be afraid to debate them. What you shouldn't do is try to basically extinguish someone else's light and then say that your light is brighter.
It's the whole thing is truly astonishing. Now, this would, of course, go to the U.S. Supreme Court, won't it? And the U.S. Supreme Court ultimately is the place to judge on the U.S. Constitution. But that takes a long time to get there normally.
Well,
this can't, though, can it?
No, but they're going to expedite it. Just like recently they've ordered briefing in one of the criminal cases, federal criminal cases, about whether there is some sort of immunity because he was a federal official. They will expedite this. And there is a case, it involved the Free Enterprise Club, and I can't think of the other party, in about 2010, where the United States Supreme Court literally said that a office holder is essentially someone appointed by the President of the United States. So the Supreme Court has actually interpreted this term before. And as I said, if you look at the plain reading of the Constitution, it's not applicable. And then you throw in the fact that Donald Trump has never been indicted or charged with anything. Now, people may say, oh my gosh, he did this or he said this, but, we have a First Amendment, and, people may not like what Donald Trump has to say all the time, but he has a right to say it. And more importantly, people that support Donald Trump should have the right to go to the ballot box and vote for him if that's what they want to do.
So the Supreme Court will chuck this out.
I think so. That's my prediction. Look, I mean, two things I will say is I think the Supreme Court's going to overturn this because they will see what a dangerous precedent this is. And I think that the one thing Republicans and Democrats agree on in the United States of America is that Joe Biden shouldn't be on the ballot. Because even the Democrats are worried about that. And that's why they're trying to do everything they can to keep Donald Trump off.
Let's shift into second gear and move on to that very point. So things just go from bad to worse for Biden. I mean, they just can't cover up anymore the fact that the poor chap is just too old for the job, just mentally, physically, not in the right state for doing the job. And his approval ratings, they just keep falling. Monmouth University's latest survey showing him down another 4 points in terms of approvals. He's down to 34%. But here's the really interesting bit, that Trump is leading Biden by a 13-point margin with the under 30s. What's happening there? Well,
I don't think that should surprise people because it's not about even Joe Biden's age or his inability to do the job. I think that Donald Trump is resonating with a lot of people, even a lot of traditional voters that don't vote for Republicans, because he's identified an issue. Look, and I saw this, there's stories today in the UK about members of parliament that may be corrupt. And so we're seeing this globally where you have people in power, people, whether they're in parliament, whether in Congress, whether in the federal government, that essentially have sold their souls because they love power so much. And Donald Trump resonates with a lot of voters when he comes along and says, look, there's a swamp, there's a deep state. You aren't getting a fair shake. And whether it's, special interest or corporate interest getting these tax breaks or, doing rent seeking and getting benefits of government, I think it resonates with people because, look, people that are younger, and I have daughters, they just want to know that if they work hard, they play by the rules, they can get ahead. And what's happening now in a lot of parts of the world, especially the Western world, is it seems like the deck is stacked against you, that if you aren't politically connected.
It's kind of hard. A lot of young people think, well, I'm never going to have what my parents had or my grandparents had. Their quality of life diminishing. Yeah, no, I get it, but it's a really, really big lead.
Well, the only thing lower, I think, right now in the United States than Biden's numbers is probably Hunter Biden after a crack binge when he's laying on the floor, right?
Well, and there's a lot more to play out with the Hunter Biden stuff as well. No, this stuff is impressive, and it would seem that if Trump is able to stand in the next elections.
Look, your viewers are smart, savvy viewers. I know that's why they're watching your show. And they have to appreciate that there is a reason why the left and the Democrats are fighting so hard to do everything they can to keep Donald Trump disengaged from running for office and engaged in fighting all these lawsuits in various states about whether he can even get on the ballot.
Yeah, I mean, assuming that he can get on the ballot, assuming that he can get through these numerous legal challenges, in terms of the primary race, his poll numbers are higher now amongst registered Republicans than they've ever been. Nikki Haley making something of a move, perhaps coming through as the sort of main opposition voice to Trump. DeSantis bombing, Vivek Ramaswamy, interesting. But Trump's going to win this nomination, no problem, isn't he?
Yeah, I recently was at an event. One of my friends invited me, was hosting Nikki Haley, and so I had an opportunity to listen to her talk. And essentially her selling point is that, well, I can win the general election. So she's kind of put all her chips into that basket. And look, I disagree with her on some issues, especially related to foreign policy. I mean, I don't think the UK or the United States can be the world's policeman and micromanaging conflicts all over the world, spending a lot of blood and treasure on those. That being said, is every day as Donald Trump gets indicted more, as he involves in these civil legal battles, his numbers are going up. And so her argument that somehow she's the one that's electable, I think is undermined, especially, and I'll tell you what, as someone who's run for office statewide in a swing state, I mean, I've seen the numbers. I mean, even though all this stuff is now baked into the cake, Donald Trump is running ahead in Arizona.
Well, he is.
He's running ahead in Georgia. He's running ahead in the swing states.
And
that's why I think you're seeing the left and the Democrats fighting so hard to do everything they can.
No, they're scared. They're scared. They're scared. And what about the Democrats? They've got their convention. That'll be coming up in July 2024. I said a couple of months back, Mark, that as a Trump supporter, I want Biden to be the candidate. But I just don't believe the Democrats are going to stick with him. How can they? I mean, these numbers, as they get worse and worse and worse, do you agree with me that they are going to ditch Joe at some point?
I think you're right. Now, every Democrat that I know keeps saying, no, that's not the case. That's not the case publicly. But then privately, they are scared to death. And so I think that there's two things that I think will happen at the Democratic convention. I think, one, you're going to probably see a record amount of marijuana sales around that event because people must be high if they're supporting Joe Biden. But the second thing I think you're going to see is the Democrats ditching Joe Biden because they have to see the numbers and they have to know that he can't win. And I think it's one of the reasons why Gavin Newsom did that debate with Ron DeSantis because he's trying to show, and he was way far on the left.
And quite clever of Fox News to put that on, wasn't it?
And I think that he was trying to essentially make the argument that just in case anything happens, here I am. And so, sometimes you hear these murmurings about, well, Michelle Obama or, will Biden step aside for Kamala Harris? But the Democrats have put themselves in a real pickle. And, they're kind of stuck with Joe Biden. But I do think that behind the scenes, every Democrat I talk to is petrified that if it's Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, that Donald Trump will win. And I think that's why you see all these lawsuits. Yeah. That's why you see the criminal indictments. Yeah. And I think you're right. And we'll have to, we'll have to go back a year from now and run this. But I agree with you. I think if you're a betting guy, I don't think Joe Biden's going to be the nominee.
No. And Newsom, the favorite?
I would go with Newsom probably.
Who then has to defend the record he's got in California.
That's what he tried to do against that debate in DeSantis. I mean, he did a lot of deflection and everything else. But look, the reality is someone like Gavin Newsom is, he's a good-looking, articulate guy. And, I think he's going to try to do the kind of the Bill Clinton strategy. And, hey, I'm the face of the new Democratic Party or whatever. And so I think that's the person, but you never know. I mean, there's those rumors about maybe Michelle Obama and,
I find that really hard to believe.
Well, I find that hard to believe.
The Obamas have got a great life now. Why get back into politics?
That's true. Politics is a nasty business.
We know. Both of us. We've got scars on our backs, I promise you.
Yes.
No, I mean, but Newsom has to defend the education record, the growth of homelessness, the
crime.
I mean, and what's happened to beautiful cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles. My guess is he struggles a bit with that. Yeah. One of the issues that is dominating politics across the West is illegal migration, well, legal and illegal, but illegal particularly. You've got the Mediterranean crisis going on. It's been going on now for about 8 years. Fundamentally changing European politics. Geert Wilders coming out top in that poll. In the Netherlands recently, the French Parliament last night passing really quite strong laws on people who cross the Mediterranean. Marine Le Pen, currently the bookie's favourite to be the next president. Big changes there. A Conservative government in Britain struggling like crazy. Keep promising to deal with the issue, but they never ever do, and going down in the polls as a result. The numbers that have crossed the southern border during the Biden presidency, somewhere between 5.5 and 6 million people. It's incredible. Yeah,
and that some of the estimates are even higher because those are, we're talking about encounters, but we also know that there's also a bunch of, folks that aren't encountered with Border Patrol that are sneaking through the dead of night wearing camouflage and, essentially.
I've seen this in Arizona.
And so, I mean, look, when you think about it, 6 million people just in the 3 years Joe Biden's been president. Let's assume that number's that low. I mean, we're talking about, the population of 3 or 4 U.S. states combined, some of the states. And so this is a record amount of money. It's costing us, and not only in terms financially, whether it's with education, whether it's with schools, whether it's with healthcare, but also what I worry about is it's empowering the drug cartels. And the drug cartels are making record profits. I worry that Mexico is on the brink of becoming a failed state. And even just today, I saw one of the Biden officials talking about that they finally reached some deal with China to stop them from 12 precursor chemicals coming into Mexico. And I was so furious because I thought to myself, it's 3 years in. It's the leading cause of death amongst people 18 to 49 in the United States. And 3 years in, you're finally going to talk to China about it? Yeah. But not only that, we're talking about not only those costs in human lives and human treasure, but I think, as you mentioned, throughout Europe, you're seeing folks that are worried that when someone's first act, and look, I'm a first-generation American, but when your first act is, breaking the law and not willing to assimilate into the culture. I mean, I think it undermines.
I think your family's quite well assimilated.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
So, well, no, but I bring this up, Nigel, and I'm not trying to be a little sensitive, but I'll tell you what. When I issued an opinion, I was the first Attorney General in the United States issued an opinion that said what was going on at our southern border constituted an invasion. I was attacked mercilessly by, and you know what this is like, by the left, by the mainstream media in America saying that it was racist and how dare I, and I was being hypocritical. And the reality is now you even have Democratic governors saying we should call out the National Guard and do something.
Well, I mean, even the mayor of New York is saying we can't cope.
Oh.
This is wholly unsustainable. It's a disaster.
Well, here's one thing I think that should happen. The next Attorney General of the United States should start prosecuting these mayors and these governors that have created sanctuary cities, sanctuary harbors under Title 8 of the U.S. Code, Section 1324. There was a case just last year at the U.S. Supreme Court that said it upheld the constitutionality of a statute in the United States that said if you are harboring, encouraging, soliciting immigration, you can be guilty of a federal crime. So how is it that the mayor of New York or the mayor of Chicago, when they are providing housing and encouraging people to come there, saying you're a sanctuary city, refusing to let law enforcement work with federal officials to arrest people that are in the country illegally? That, to me, is the very definition of aiding and abetting illegal immigration.
Now, that will be something to watch if we do get a strong Attorney General following the next general election. Now, one particular politician who is doing something about this is the Texas governor. Now, Greg Abbott has signed SB 4. I worry sometimes that even people who care about current affairs, they hear SB 4, they hear... Come on, you explain, as a legal man, SB 4, what it means. What has Governor Abbott actually done? Well,
there was a law that recently passed in Texas that essentially said that the state can prosecute people for entering the country illegally. And here's the problem. This is a noble gesture, I would say, but there literally is a case involving Arizona about 12, 13 years ago, where Arizona tried to do something very similar. And the U.S. Supreme Court said that states cannot enforce immigration laws. And so the U.S. Supreme Court has narrowed what states can do because historically, in the United States, if you look at presidential authority when it comes to national security, border security, that is where a president...
These are federal decisions.
Right. That's when they're at the apex of their power. And so people are frustrated. I know Governor Abbott's probably frustrated. The people of Texas, people of Arizona, people of California are frustrated. And the reality, though, is that that's why it is a federal function, but there are things that states can do. And that's one of the things I had argued at the U.S. Supreme Court just a few years ago, what was called the public charge rule. So when Joe Biden was trying to give benefits to people that are entering the country illegally, we said that was against the law. And so we tried to take him into account on that because I basically argued that that is incentivizing people breaking the law. So unfortunately, and this is once again, we're making predictions here, I think the U.S. Supreme Court's probably going to strike that law down without weighing in on whether it's a good or bad thing. But to me, it's just an indication of how frustrated the states are about the Joe Biden and his administration doing nothing.
Nice try, Governor Abbott.
Well, yes, but one of the things, this is why, and I've talked about this for years too, is that why someone like Secretary Mayorkas, Secretary of Homeland Security, he is derelict in his duty. Why haven't the Republican Congress impeached him? Why haven't they moved to cut off funding for him and his office if he's not going to do his job?
Well, Congress has now moved against President Biden.
Well, they're finally starting to.
Taken a long time.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. You'd have to ask the politicians that. I mean, that's... but
I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? Because the Hunter Biden laptop appears in the run-up to the November 2020 presidential general election. We now know that basically the West Coast tech giants decided they wouldn't allow the American public full access to what had been done. Some quite senior former intelligence officers who'd worked for the American state, 51 of them signed a letter saying the whole thing was some kind of Russian conspiracy. And yet in the face of all of this, it's taken the Republicans on Capitol Hill all this time to move against Biden. I find that astonishing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess in some ways I don't find it astonishing because I think that Washington, D.C. is where good ideas go to die. And I think that too often, when we talk,
you're probably right.
There is a political class not only here in London, but there's a political class in Washington, D.C. that carry and worry more about getting reelected and staying in power and getting all the perks of that than they do about the people they represent. And I think that even with Hunter Biden, they tried to give him a sweetheart deal. And, because people exposed that, including people in Congress, they had to, pull that back. And so I think that it is moving at a glacial pace, but it is moving. And unfortunately, it's like in battle where you have chaff, where you throw something up to throw off, the air systems when you're in a plane. That essentially what the Democrats are doing. They're throwing up so much stuff saying, oh, look at how bad Donald Trump is. And oh my gosh, Hunter Biden, whatever. And, trying to deflect from the fact that fundamentally you have a guy here who's getting paid millions of dollars, who has no experience, who's literally hitting the crack pipe, and yet companies are paying him. And there's all this communication now that's been exposed with the big guy, right? That's Joe Biden.
I know.
And they're getting money. It's the very definition of corruption. And when people are so displeased with people in power, this is what it is. It's where your family's getting millions of dollars because of who you are.
And they're incredible sums of money, aren't they? Yeah. They come from Ukraine, they come from
China,
they come from Russia. I mean, the whole thing's unbelievable. I just get the feeling, Mark, that, and I've been to a lot of Trump rallies out around the country. I've spoken at a couple. I mean, amazing, as a foreigner, but I have. But I get the feeling that the centre of gravity of those audiences and Trump Republican voters is a very different centre of gravity to the elected Republicans who sit in the House and in the Senate. That somehow there's still a large part of the elected body of Republicans who are DCers, basically.
Yeah, I think that there is a little bit of a disconnect between the people that are elected and, I'll call it the base of the party. So yes, once again, I think that the reason why Donald Trump has been able to attract certain groups that maybe Republicans haven't been able to historically is because he is speaking to people, whether it's young people, whether it's people in other groups that are traditionally Democratic, that look, there is something wrong with the system and he's going to shake up the system. And look, the reality is that I don't always agree with Donald Trump. Like some of the stuff he has said recently about, even the federal Department of Education. Look, I'm a big believer that those are issues that should be left up to the states and local government, that we shouldn't federalize every problem, because you don't want to get in a situation where you give this power, you cede it to the federal government, and then, when the next time there's a Democratic administration, they're going to use that to drive a truck through to impose even more of their left-wing agenda. And the thing about government, I tell people this all the time, wherever you're at, whether you're in the UK, whether you're in France, whether you're in the United States, is that if you let a bully in your front yard, the next day he's going to be on your porch, and the day after that he's going to be shacking up with your wife. I mean, shagging, I guess we would say over here, right? Can we say that on the air?
Off the watershed.
Yes, yeah. But the point is that you cannot cede that kind of authority to any government body, because they're going to continue to use it and use it and use it. And then government becomes more unaccountable and more oppressive.
I'm with you. I'm a Reaganite. I don't trust big government. I think people get on with things better on their own at local level. Final thought. What next for Mark Brnovich?
I'm not sure. I enjoy being here in the UK.
I
think politics is nasty. And, my wife has said that she will leave me if I ever run for office again. You said we got the scars on us. But look, I'm working now in the private sector. And, I was a real lawyer. I tell people all the time. I've argued 3 times against the Supreme Court. I've handled thousands of criminal cases. So I'm kind of getting back to my roots as a litigator. But, I'm a public policy wonk. I've worked at a think tank. And I love Western civilization. I love the United States, and I want to be involved in helping, promote the rule of law and the Constitution, no matter what I do.
I believe every word of that, and thank you once again for being a friend of ours here at GB News. And I tell you what, we are going to be doing tons of output. 2024 in the USA is going to be just huge. It's going to be a massive election campaign, a real cultural clash between the new radical left and the Trumpite conservatives. And it doesn't just matter for America because they are the leaders of the free world. It matters one whole heap for all of us. See you again soon.